All right, we're going to get this started. Welcome, everybody. This is Lars Light on behalf of the Somm Journal, the Somm Foundation, and the new Sotheby's Wine Encyclopedia by National Geographic Publishing. Welcome to our winery close-ups, interpreting soil and minerality. This is being recorded on Facebook Live. It will be also recorded on the sommjournal.com and sommfoundation.com websites. So please tune in there. And we're also going to be in the June-July issue, have a recap in the June-July issue of the Somm Journal. So be sure to tune into that. So as always, we have a great lineup of panelists to talk to you. And we've got a very special guest host with us as well. But first and foremost, we've got some wonderful incentives, as always, for you to pay some attention and take some notes. And Lynn Fletcher from the Somm Foundation is going to tell us a little bit about some of those incentives. Lynn, how about it? Take it away.
Hi, Lars. Thank you. So just want to say thanks again to the Somm Journal and all our panelists and you, Lars, for making this. We will be doing a drawing for 8 of you on this webinar today to receive access to Somm Geo for 1 year. So we'll be doing that by Monday, and those of you that are lucky enough to get that will hear from us soon. We also have an essay competition, so we'll be sending out a prompt to all of you by Monday with the essay question, and you'll have until April 4th to submit your essays. And the top 2 winners will receive a copy of the new Sotheby's Wine Encyclopedia, and first place will get a check for $400. So keep in mind, we'll post the webinar again on our website, so you can always review. And we look forward to seeing your submissions. And back to you, Lars.
Thank you very much. And I apologize for any background noise I have too. I don't want to torture anybody, but I am broadcasting here from Tuscany. So if you hear a tractor or 2 in the background, it's because I'm at a Tuscan winery. So as I said, we have a great panel lined up. Very excited about this. We happen to have 2 of the current 28 female women master sommeliers present with us. One is on the panel, and one is our very special guest host, Andrea Robinson, who many of you will, I really don't think Andrea needs a lot of introduction. You know her as a TV host, 3 times James Beard Award winner. She is the personage behind the One Stemware, a great resource for our industry, and really one of my role models for sure. So thank you, Andrea, for being here. And we've also got Greg Van Wagner, who is the wine and beverage director for now I can't read my handwriting. Greg, where is that?
This is actually formerly of Jimmy's for 8 years, and actually now I have an exciting new project here in Aspen. So
great. Yeah,
it's called
Ajax Cellars.
Ajax Cellars too. A little bit of wine, so a little bit of everything here.
Excellent. Most important is creator of Somm Geo for our context today. So thank you for being here. And Andrea, I'm going to hand the reins over to you and ask you to take it away and take us on our journey through minerality.
Awesome, thank you. This is so much fun. It's actually really a rarity to be able to be with 2 other master sommeliers at the same time, as well as a star-studded list of great commentators and panelists, wine experts from various sectors of the industry who are going to be talking about these wines today. But I have to say that I think between Jillian and myself, we probably have sold a combination of what would be about easily hundreds of cases of all the wines that we're tasting today here or talking about, because between the 2 of us at Windows on the World, I think every single one of these wines was on the list at least at some point. And I know the J. Lore Riverstone, you probably remember, was one of our banquet Chardonnay pours. So in a big place like that, we poured through a lot of these great wines. So it's very, very fun to be putting them all together in this context of minerality. And I'll be introducing each of the speakers as we go. But what I first want to do is get a couple of parameters out there. I've talked to all the speakers about this, and I think we're on the same page. And it's a controversial term. So let's talk about what makes it controversial. And one of the big things that does that, of course, is the notion that if the vine touches a piece of rock, it takes up a mineral from that rock and pumps the flavor of that mineral into the berry. And it's a lot more complicated relationship than that. And we'll try to delve into a few of the piece parts of it here. So what we're really going to be talking about today is a little bit broader definition around the concept of the taste and the texture and the smell of the place, which of course includes the soil and the soil's components. And I thought it would be fun to define soil. So I did a little research. Brenna Quigley is one of the geologists who specializes in wine industry soil analysis. And she explains soil as the unconsolidated cover of the earth, and tells us that soil is 45% minerals, only 5% organic matter in the typical soil. So that's anything that was alive and was capable of creating energy at some point and then has passed on into decay. That's the organic matter. And then water and air, each making up together the rest of the 50%. So when you think about minerality, soil, and terroir, you also have to think about all of those things that are in the soil. And then there's another expert who I saw in a webisode talking about that in every handful of healthy soil, there are more microbes than there have ever been people alive on Earth since the beginning of humankind. So that too would be part of soil, it would be part of place, and it surely would therefore be a part of how the wine expresses. The pH range for wine soils is 5.5 to 8.5, with the sweet spot, I think, being around 6.5. That's important because the vines can't take up the minerals in the soil if the pH isn't right, but they're highly adaptive to varied pHs, and we'll learn more about that. What are minerals? They're an inorganic compound with a defined chemical composition in crystal form. So water is not a mineral, but ice is considered a mineral because it's crystallized. Very interesting. That surprised me. And a lot of times we talk about minerals when what we really mean are elements, things like iron, things like phosphorus. So very interesting to think about what these things really are. And then finally, what are rocks? Because that's really what we talk a lot about when it comes to the portions of the soil that are maybe giving particular minerality or particular pH to it. And those are an aggregate of one or more minerals. So with those definitions in mind, we're going to jump over to one of the other great places in wine country, which is, of course, the Napa Valley, where I'm coming from. And I hope that the people I see, we've got lots of great places represented here in the chat. Miami, Milan, we've got Philly, we've got Chicago, we've got Minnesota, lots and lots of, and of course, many fellow Californians. But I'm going to pass it over to Greg Van Wagner, fellow master sommelier. He's the creator of SomGeo, and he's going to bring us specifically to exactly where we are in tasting this first wine. We're lucky to be with the leader of Silverado Vineyards to talk about one of their great Cabernet Sauvignons, and I can't wait to jump into this because it's a wonderful way to kick it off. So Greg, take us away.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Andrea. It's great to be here. And yes, we're going to go really all around the world today. We've got great wineries. We're going to start kind of all the way up in Napa with Silverado Vineyards, Etude as well. And again, so many of these wines I've worked with over the years. I mean, it's a really great representation. Marietta as well in Livermore Valley. And then we'll head down to Monterey with Jay Lohr, one of the original pioneers of that region. And then cross the ocean over to Italy. A bit far from Lars, though. We're in Northeast Italy with Kettmeyer, as well as Yermon. But back to Napa. So certainly, as we all know, one of the most worldwide recognized wine regions of California, just above San Francisco and the San Pablo Bay. Specifically, we're going to be talking quite a bit about this Mount George vineyard. It's a really, really special vineyard in Coombsville, and I believe it's just as you go up the slopes there, but I'd have to confirm that, but I believe we're right in there. Really, really stellar. And then head over to the winery itself, just an iconic estate nestled here in the foothills of the Stag's Leap District. Here we have really incredible winery. And back to Andrea and Silverado, and I'd love to hear more about this.
Fantastic. Thanks, Greg. So when we are talking about expression of place and we're talking about Napa Valley, of course, we're really most prominently talking about the expression of Cabernet Sauvignon. And so with that, I'm introducing Russ Weiss from Silverado Vineyards. And the wine that we're talking about is their Geo. And I'm going to have you also just tell me if I'm pronouncing that correctly, because obviously it's, I'm sure, shortening up the Mount George vineyard and the reference to that. Greg showed us a beautiful image of it, but Russ, let's go straight to the soil type. There's a lot to talk about here, but let's go straight to the soil type on Mount George, because it's a really fascinating discussion that it prompts.
Well, thanks, by the way, for having me. And let me just first say that was a pun, an intentional pun. Obviously, Geo does refer to Mount George. The vineyard is basically the foothill, the western foothill of Mount George. But also, we wanted to, use a little Greek and honor the earth and the soils there. So obviously, harkening back to the Greek origins of geography and geology, and that's how you remember how to pronounce it, Geo. So, yeah, it's one of the great privileges of being in such a young appellation, relatively speaking, is that you get to do fun things like create sub-appellations. And so we were very privileged as Silverado to be on the committee that created the Coombsville appellation that was finally approved by the TTB in 2011. And one of the things about that is to define not only climate and the history of viticulture, but also the soil types. What's interesting about Coombsville is it's filled with something that's really easy to remember for all of us. Coombsville gravelly loam, that is the soil type. And it's characteristic. Obviously, it's very similar to a lot of the Vaca range, which is the mountain range, as you all know, on the eastern side of the valley, which is all, granolitic. It's all volcanic material because that range was created volcanically. But one of the interesting things about Mount George is has these big chunks of compressed volcanic ash as well. And that is one of the character. Yeah, there we go. There it is. It looks like a rock, but you can absolutely pull it apart, and it actually feels a lot more like chalk. And so that is in that beautiful sort of tipped up horseshoe that is Coombsville, 20, 30, sometimes 40 feet down below the surface. You have a lot of boulders of this compressed ash. And so what that does for us in an area of the valley that gets very little rainfall is that rain gets filtered through the volcanic schist and shale material, and then collects in those big boulders of ash. And the vines are going down and tapping into that to find a source of water in an otherwise fairly arid area of the valley.
So really interesting as I was reading more about Tuff, because, we study it a little bit in those of us who are geeking out on credentials and deep dives on wine information. We studied a little bit and we know about it as being a soil type in Campania in Italy. And it makes sense. It's essentially, as I understand it, volcanic ash that explodes from vents in the volcano. And then it gets compressed and settles into this, what looks like rock, but relatively soft, like you said. So it's historically over millennia been used for buildings and things like that. But it's apparently, aside from being a great water holder, really great at delivering the key nutrients that a vine needs back to the vine. So even though it would be considered poor soil with low organic matter, it's got the water holding capacity, and then it's apparently able to just really give those nutrients that give you this healthy, beautiful fruit. So tell me about what you do and don't do with the fruit that you get from there.
Right. So, I mean, that's a really excellent point. And in contrast to the steep slopes here, where the winery is in Stag's Leap, where we have, our sweet spot is this Perkins loam here. That doesn't have that same water holding capacity because it doesn't have these chunks of tuff. And so the answer to the question is we don't do much because we have some tuff. So we're not really trying to hold, we're not, what we're really trying to do is more protect the environment around that. So we're trying to fix the topsoils. We've got a lot of, we obviously use two kinds of ground covers depending on where we think we are with organic material. But for the most part, because we're in a dry area, we're using what we call the California mix, which is just reseeding California natives in the rows to keep that topsoil from slipping off. We've got 3 creeks that run through the vineyard, and so and that feeds into the Napa River. So this is a fish-friendly farming certified, Napa Green certified vineyard, like all of our estate, and that those third-party audited certificates really help us understand the whole environment that the vineyard is sitting in. Only about 60% of our estate is vineyards. The other 40% is native area around the vineyards, and we need to protect that, and especially the Napa River. So what we're really trying to do there, because the vines seem to be quite happy with the way things are, is just fixing that topsoil so it doesn't go anywhere, and making sure that because the vines are really reaching down quite deep. When we do soil pits out there, we've got root systems that are going 35, 40 feet down. So they're quite happy, and they're finding all kinds of stuff that we don't even really know about. So we're letting them do their thing on that site.
So to summarize, and I'll take it into the glass here for a second, because I think, and I'm sure that Greg and Jillian and Christina, I know you're sort of an avid advanced blind taster. You would probably agree with me. You can give me a nod. When we're talking about typicity of Napa Valley Cabernet, we're really talking about this sort of more restraint, more bramble, more a little bit herbal expression, and even in the mid palate, sometimes some salinity. Is that a good way to say it? As opposed to necessarily really big and enormous. This is so beautiful and subtle. I would almost put it in Bulgari if I were guessing, where does this Cabernet come from? Because it's really just a beautiful, seamless whole.
Well, I'll take that. I'll take Bulgari all day long. I love Bulgari, but I think the answer to that is that the discipline is around making sure that the pick time leaves you the acidic tension that actually shows that. Obviously, I think that's one of those areas where no matter what you say about natural winemaking or non sort of interventionist winemaking, you still have to decide when to pick, right?
Right.
And so for us, making sure that pick time is early enough so that those elements are going to be there and show in the wine later. And that's, you were talking about pH in the soil, that's a function of pH in the wine.
Right. I love it. And I think this is just so beautifully balanced. And I have to just say, I looked at the spreadsheet, and the price is eye-popping in the opposite sense from what you would expect. It's SRP $78, which is staggeringly great value when it comes to Napa Valley Cabernet of this level of texture and detail and filigree. So bravo to that. I would say, if it ain't, broke, don't fix it. But clearly you're using your native plants and things like that to preserve what this site has to offer. And so super, super exciting. Thank you so much, Russ. I know you've got to jump for your next thing, and we are going to now pass it along to another fantastic terroir expression of another fantastic local terroir here. But everybody check out the Gio Silverado Cabernet. It is beautiful wine. Thank you again.
Thanks so much. Great to see you.
You too. And let's go back to Greg, because you've got to fly us over to a little bit closer to the Pacific Ocean, I believe.
Absolutely. So we are going a little bit closer to the Pacific Ocean, still right above the San Pablo Bay in San Francisco. One of the great constants in California, the closer you are to the cool waters of the Pacific, obviously it cools down fairly significantly. And into Carneros, one of the original AVAs, of course, split between Napa and Sonoma, but really where Burgundy varieties take hold. It's they've become really the classic place in California for some of great Burgundy varieties. Etude definitely made their name in Pinot Noir, great Chardonnay, and really, really great estates here. And I'm excited to hear more. And back to Andrea.
Thank you so much. So I just, as I'm smelling this wine and also looking at it against my white background here, the first thing I want to say is it looks and smells like Pinot Noir. And I'm always excited about that because it's so perfumed. I almost feel like I want to dab it behind my earlobes, but we've got Jillian Balance, who is the master sommelier and education goddess for Treasury Wine Estates USA. And as I said before, fellow master sommelier from back in the day at Windows on the World until she went on to bring Baccara into its great heights and so on. So Jillian, take me first of all to, I think this is I always remember Tony Soter when he first founded Etude saying that he chose the wine name. It means study in French because Pinot Noir is forever a study, but it's also a paradigm of terroir transmission and transparency. Just talk a little bit about Pinot Noir philosophically when it comes to Etude and specifically Grace Benoit. And then I have some specific questions about the vineyard and the approaches there.
Will do. And good morning to everybody from Napa Valley. It's great to be here amongst this esteemed panel. And Andrea, I will never forget how you taught me to run a wine program at Windows on the World back in the day. It certainly took me far in my career. So I'm forever grateful for that. Thanks. And I also didn't tell you, Andrea, that during COVID, I actually got a degree in geology. Just kidding. Just kidding, I didn't.
I'm trying, but yeah, I don't have the patience to study that much.
You know, I do know a lot about the soil types and everything at Grace Benoit, but I do not consider myself in a realm of expertise as far as that subject is concerned, which you know, is neither here nor there. I think that when Tony Soter entered the partnership with Treasury Wine Estates, the goal was to find the absolute best place to grow Pinot Noir in the Carneros region. And you're right, he named the winery Etude to insinuate that Pinot Noir is a lifelong study. It's such a transparent varietal that can really show its site very beautifully. And I will say that John Priest, who's our current winemaker, does produce Pinot Noir in small lots from a lot of different AVAs, and he makes it exactly the same way. And it's always just astounding how different those wines are. Now, whether that's minerality being defined in the glass or not, I mean, who knows? But it certainly does represent this idea of Pinot Noir being very transparent. And where a lot of the Carneros region is kind of these bay bottoms that were uplifted, kind of these heavier clay pockets that maybe don't offer the same kind of drainage capabilities as where Grace Benoit Estate is situated. I think that was one of the factors that they considered, because if anybody's ever been to Etude and visited our hospitality center and winery, which is quite beautiful, it's surrounded by acreage that we don't actually farm to make our wines because it's just not suitable. So the partnership with Tony and Treasury was to find a home, find the very best place that we could create these beautiful estate wines from. You're looking at the map. You can see plenty of wildlife corridors through here. This is a beautiful, sustainably farmed ranch that's around 1,100 acres with about 500 planted to grapes, not 5 acres, sorry. 500 planted to vines. So, and you could see that it's this really crazy patchwork of different loamy soil types. Some are, named for their series like Laniger. You could see the Kid Stony Loam section. So really taking into consideration aspect of the vines, how the rows were spaced, selecting different clones to match these patchwork of vineyards. And we are situated right on the Rogers Creek fault line. So hence one of our single vineyard sites called Temblor, which means earthquake. So there's a lot of activity under the ground and soils that are, 8+ million years of age. So, how that ends up reflecting itself in the wine, I think is up to the taster. I know for me, minerality comes across in so many different ways. It can be a product of fermentation, right? It can be so many things. It can, for me often is represented by just a real struggle of the vine too. You can just kind of taste that struggle when you grow vines on very rocky soils, that they're not being, overly nutriented. That's not a word, but you know what I'm trying to say.
I think you're 100% right. And that's really the knife edge balance, especially for a vine like Pinot Noir that is a little bit finicky anyway. When I'm tasting this, it's it's so aromatically evolving just in this short amount of time that it's been in the glass. I want to speak to something that you mentioned about acreage that you don't farm. It was a very thoughtful approach taken for this particular ranch around leaving habitats and wildlife corridors and minimizing mechanical and chemical inputs. And we're seeing more and more about the overall ecosystem of the vineyard, including its habitats, its animal life, and its plant life. Talking about that also being a part of the terroir. Can you speak a little bit more to just some of the stuff that they're doing there?
Well, they make their, we use compost, we use organic minerals to add nutrients to the vineyards. We have, and if everybody's been to Napa Valley around this time of year, the sheep are out in full force.
Yes,
so we have a few hundred sheep and a sheepdog that doesn't really do too much, but really kind of helping to, kind of assist with creating some really good cover crop during the growing season. They're really like munching away and eating and then fertilizing.
Exactly.
I like to think of Etude, and back in my sommelier days, they ran a really incredible program on sustainability, which we're trying to bring back now post-COVID, where they would invite sommeliers to come and stay and visit the ranch for a couple days and really get a sensation of what that means, because it's, it's sustainability in the vineyards, it's sustainability in the winery. You could see we have a garden that we contribute about 10,000 pounds of food to the Napa Valley Food Bank every year. Very protective of our resources is, I guess, the best way of putting it.
And really maintaining an ecosystem that ultimately is a big part of the terroir expression. I think the purity and precision of the fruit here is a really big part of it. And that's always kind of what we're looking for with Pinot Noir. And then there's the nuance that you only can really describe, and when you then taste it in a wine that's grown a hop, skip, and a jump from there, and understand how different they are. So this is really a beautiful expression, and I think it's a great example of the restraint and subtlety and aromatic tension that Carneros can represent.
Yeah, it's not a wimpy wine at all. Even though during the growing season, it's about 20 degrees cooler at Grace Benoit than where our winery and hospitality center are located. You need a vest in late August. It's very, very cool climate, blanketed by fog, until the early afternoon, just rolling in from the San Pablo Bay. So all of those factors and the soil type, I think, really do create a pretty beautiful, complex Pinot Noir. And, kudos to Tony for wanting to promote the Carneros appellation as well, because a lot of wineries that are in Napa Valley, some of ours as well, we source fruit from Carneros, but since we can still call it Napa, we call it Napa because that's obviously a more marketable AVA, arguably. So kudos to Etude for really highlighting that this is a wine from the Carneros appellation. I think that the wine has this kind of sappiness, but also a crunchiness to it as well. And kind of this slightly blue fruit character that I think, pardon me, you don't get from Russian River Valley or different appellations throughout California.
That is great for you blind tasters looking for some terminology. I agree 1000% with those three things. Christina, I bet you do too when it comes to Carneros Pinot Noir. Greg, obviously, but when we're trying to parse out what's different between that and Russian River Valley and so on, those are three fantastic words that I think are truly spot on. It's a beautiful wine. Thank you so much. I want to taste it in 10 years. I bet it's going to be just killer. So we'll have to figure that one out, Jillian. But thank you very, very much. This is just gorgeous. Let's keep on trucking, though. We've got to now, although I guess if it's California and we're doing wine country touring, maybe we've rented a ragtop. So we're not trucking, we're convertible in. And we're going to head on south to an unbelievably historic appellation. Greg, take us there.
Absolutely. So we are headed to the Livermore Valley. Yes, extraordinarily historic. And, you know, really when you're looking in California, these different wine regions, you know, pool cool air, they pool fog from the Pacific and throughout the bays in there. And, you know, Napa, Sonoma, they pull from the north. Livermore, we have this kind of southeastern, similar to like Anderson Valley, Monterey, kind of southeastern as well. But they pull the fog in just the same. In the Livermore Valley, one of the most historic regions in California. And we're going to a really, really beautiful estate. It'll take 1 second to load, but yeah, there we are. The Arroyo Mucho River going right behind it. Fantastic, fantastic. And back to Andrea to hear more.
Wow. Oh gosh. I Coravined that with the screw cap thing the other day because I just kind of wanted to see what would happen, especially after Felix talked to me about his wine needing some air or at least changing in a cool way with some air. And whoa, it's this is, first of all, it's just a beautiful Sauvignon Blanc. We've got Phil Wente. You know the name. What are we in the 6th generation now of Wente's running the place, or at least taking the reins? I know you're 4 or 5. I don't know. You're 4th generation. Anyway, tell us a little bit more about your spot in the hierarchy here.
Well, good morning, everyone from Myriad as well. Beautiful winery that is right behind me in the picture. I'm honored to be the 4th generation of the Wente family. The 5th generation is actually fully engaged in operating the winery at this point, which is why I get to have fun and talk to you all and taste wine because they're back over at the winery working. And my daughter, Jordan Wente, is the marketing director of Myriad as well. So also a pleasure to be able to work with my daughter and really enjoyable. So there's also 6th generation Wente's on their way from, I think, 16 years old down to 2 weeks.
Wow.
So
That's awesome.
So we've got a good chance at continuing on.
Must be something in the water, or at least the soil. Can you talk a little bit about this patch here, because it's apparently something that you guys have recognized the potential of a long time ago. Talk about what's going on in this particular patch of ground.
Well, as Greg showed in the satellite view, the Arroyo Mocho, the Livermore Valley has 2 primary arroyos that come out of the southeastern mountains and have deposited gravel alongside the arroyos in about a mile-wide band, so a half mile on either side. And Myriad as well is located right next to the Arroyo Mocho It's a soil type that's listed in the USGS as Livermore coarse gravel. And it literally goes down for hundreds of feet. So it's just small rocks to medium-sized rocks with a little bit of sand, a lot of sandstone, some volcanic, more aggregate type rocks. And the whole area was, volcanic background from Mount Diablo, which influenced all of the Bay Area in Northern California. And so it really allows the great drainage and the vines to be controlled easily from a vigor standpoint, so that we get this marvelous maturity and intensity and we're talking about our Sauvignon Blanc today. Really fun history with this estate. It was originally built in 1884 by Louis Mel, who was a French immigrant that brought, along with Charles Wetmore's efforts, Charles Wetmore being the first executive director of the California Wine Commission. They brought in these great vines from all the great chateaus in order to provide pedigreed background for the growers that were starting again in the 1880s after phylloxera and economic disasters had hit. Their philosophy was, if we're going to start again, let's do it right. So the Sauvignon Blanc that's planted on this estate was sourced from Chateau Yquem, and has been one of the major clonal selections of UC Davis over the years that's been brought to a virus-free status and then replanted by a lot of people. But we have some vines here that are in their 5th or 6th generation that have never left the estate. And it just produces a Sauvignon Blanc of marvelous intensity. And when we're talking about minerality, while it may be very difficult to say that there's actually a mineral component, it's undeniable that there's that aromatics that just you feel like you're smelling the wet stones in the soil as you're enjoying the wine. So I'm gonna have a little sip to get my
100%. It's a beautiful,
online.
Absolutely. It's a beautiful melon-rich expression. You mentioned no problems with vigor because it's such a poor soil, so much gravel, so low organic matter. And obviously that's for a beautiful expression of Sauvignon Blanc, the vigor piece of it is a big deal, right? Because we don't want to have excessive vigor that gives us those sort of veggie qualities. There's zero of that in here. It's all really lush melon, but there is that wet white gravel. My grandmother's driveway was that white gravel. And after the rain, the smell of that, I'll always notice that when it's there in the wine. And you also get it texturally in the palate. I wanted to ask, since the vines are technically stressed from a soil perspective, like what do you do to get the most out of them, to get them to really focus on that fruit complexity?
Well, we manage the soils very well. I mean, so we're certified sustainable, but we just meter in a little bit of compost and keep the organic levels where we want, the calcium magnesium balance where we need it to be. We feather in, it's wonderful, the technology that's available today in terms of petiole sensors and other things, so that you can manage your drip system just to keep the vine growth where you want it. And I mean, we're very much a believer in a balanced vine where you have somewhere between 20 and 25 leaves on a shoot in order to really ripen a cluster of grapes to that beautiful full maturity state where you walk out in the vineyard at harvest and the intensity just pops. And so it's that balancing act that you do with a lot of visual and a lot of hands-on, going and digging holes, looking at the soil, looking at the roots, doing some analyticals and making sure that you're putting back in your bank account what you're taking out. And so we've been growing, we bought the property in 1940, but this Sauvignon Blanc has been growing on this property since 1884. In order to do that, just clearly have to be managing it and loving it and giving back to it with all of the intensity that it needs and takes.
But fantastic. So not quite singing Gregorian chants to them at night, but real darn close, baby
Pretty
in those
close.
vineyards. Well, thank you, Phil. Fantastic. It's just a beautiful, beautiful expression. I'm still tasting that wet gravel driveway as
Still
if
trying
I've
to
inhaled.
put this in
It's,
front of my face.
yeah, no, it's gorgeous. Here, I'll do it.
There we
But we've just talked a lot about arroyos, which if you don't speak Spanish, that translates to stream. And over time, those have been really important in the coastal wine growing areas of California. So we therefore move on to the Arroyo Seco, dried stream is what that would mean, region of California. Greg, take us to the Heart Center for J. Lord Riverstone Chardonnay.
Absolutely. So we are going down to Monterey. There you see one very, very important thing when you're talking about Monterey is the Monterey Bay. Now this is 2 miles deep in some places and about 60 miles wide. So it's rare to have such a large cold water tank so close to the land there. And specifically Monterey in the Salinas Valley, Arroyo Seco. This area, Monterey really took to Chardonnay, and Chardonnay to Monterey very well. Covers about 40% of the acreage. And J-Lore has a history going back at least 4 decades in the region, and was really one of the pioneering winemakers in this region that is really one of the longest standing regions in California and the US as far as wine growing. With that, back to Andrea for more.
Fantastic. And so we have with us Steve Peck, the director of winemaking. And I have to show this picture, Steve, in a second. I want to like make sure people see what we're talking about here, but it really is, it's a similar story in the sense of you've got a really very intensively dry, rocky soil base for this vineyard. Tell us a little bit more about it and how you handle it for the purposes of bringing out the expression of this wine.
Yeah. Well, Jerry Lore's vision really started in 1974. It's really an honor to follow Phil Wente and all that they've done for the Central Coast area. But the Arroyo Seco is really an alluvial fan, and it collects the watershed. You kind of, if you were to head straight west, you'd kind of be at the Big Sur coast, and you could picture the Pacific Ocean with giant redwood trees and whatnot. Well, whatever rainfall doesn't drain right back into the ocean collects into this water basin and funnels it finds its way to this to the headwaters of the Arroyo Seco Gorge there on the left side of the screen there. And then you see my little scribbles in red ink there, just kind of showing the way all that watershed that goes nearly to the coast there is collected and then deposited out into the Salinas Valley as it exits out into that main Salinas Valley corridor that is unobstructed to the Monterey Bay. This photo here shows a really good view of a typical Arroyo Seco soil pit, where you'll have a couple of feet of topsoil with maybe 2% organic matter in that topsoil, and then just infinite depth of sand and gravel below. And I think between the impact of the soils here in Arroyo Seco and in Provence, they talk about the Mistral. In the Salinas Valley, they talk about the wind, or they've coined it the term the damn wind. I think one of the other overlying factors that affects Arroyo Seco Chardonnay is we have additional hang time, because the daily breezes that amount to 15 to 20 miles an hour and blow for 6 to 8 hours a day during the growing season really set back the ripening date, the harvest date. because during those periods of wind, the stomates on the back of the vine leaves, they kind of pucker down, and photosynthesis is arrested for those number of hours a day. So if you looked at, and this is a little off topic because we're focusing on soils, but if you really look at Arroyo Seco Chardonnay, you will typically find us starting to harvest Chardonnay about the time that, say, Russian River is finishing with their harvest. And again, it's not explained by climate, but or in terms of daily temperatures, but certainly through the effect of that wind.
Well, and you're talking about the wind is giving the vines, a really complicated, challenging environment, stretching out the hang time because you've got just arrested photosynthesis during parts of the day where it's sunny and you should be getting it, but the stomates are closed down and so that whole element, of metabolism isn't happening. That surely, though, is a part of place and terroir expression. What I'm tasting in this wine is it's got a beautiful spectrum of fruit, from lean and crisp to lush and exotic and everything in between, stone fruits and so on. But it also has a little bit of salinity and this kind of neat, savory bite to it. It's almost a textural thing. Do you think the hang time is kind of contributing something in terms of that little savory? Are the skins getting more involved and more developed, or what do you think the story is there?
Well, we do manage vine water stress very, very intentionally. All of our summer irrigations are predicated on a pressure bomb reading where we're actually plucking leaves off and putting them in the little pressure chamber and determining how much stress the vines are under, and that does, by doing that, you do end up mineralizing activating more mineral collection by the root hairs. And so I'm told, a little bit like Jillian, I'm not a geologist, but I play one on TV, and we work with a PhD from University of Bordeaux, a gentleman by the name of Xavier Chaunet, who's been with us for over 10 years now, and really helping us to drive our flavor profile, to kind of meet some of our goals. One of which is, when somebody asks me what kind of white wine I like, I do like a white wine that bites back a bit. And I think you're getting that, in Rivershone, which of course is really targeted at a very broad audience, of course, for people that are familiar with this wine.
Yeah, I really encourage people to check it out because it has a broad audience price point, but it doesn't have what we typically expect or often find in maybe some of its competitive set, which is a lot of residual sugar and other kind of elements that take away from a terroir expression or a minerality expression. I think this is really, really expressing that it comes from a place and is farmed to that standard. And so it's, I think, really special from that perspective, because we're always looking for that wine that we can comfortably, from a price point perspective, introduce to people that tastes like it was made by the land rather than the marketing department and some creative work in the winery. Not to be anyway, I think everybody knows what I'm talking about. It's a very special wine in its competitive set, and I really, really think as kudos to you for taking that approach. I just have to show one more slide because it is so geeky and fun, and I know our audience, because you weren't joking when you said that you guys work with soil people, experts, etc. This is the kind of stuff that they're doing. Let's make sure I'm getting that to where you can see it. Really, really, yeah, geeking out on soil types. And this is the one I love. Check it out. We've got analysis for different horizons, as they say, in soil depth. and what that looks like from a lime perspective, a pH perspective, so many different things. But the biggest thing you look at as you go down is you see more and more and more rocks. And if we have learned anything from the notion of terroir that you can apply across wine regions, it's that hydric stress or water stress, vines like it to a point. And so what you're doing to manage it precisely is, I think, a really big deal. And they really don't mind rocks as long as they can work their way through them and get to where they need to find a little bit to drink and the minerals to feed the photosynthetic components. So beautiful job. Thank you. And we will actually move on to a country, and in fact, 2 regions, kind of world famous for vines that do exactly that. So Greg, if you can please take us to Italy. Not that being in Napa Valley is anything but magical, but still, I'd like to be there.
Absolutely. So we're headed to Italy, specifically northern Italy and northeastern Italy. Really, when you're talking about the great wine regions of northern Italy, you're talking about the interplay of these low foothills and valleys of the Alps, right? The mountains themselves, they're too cold. The seasons are too short for high quality viticulture. The plains, as you can see, they take up most of the land area, but it's too fertile, too productive. And specifically with the talk of geology and minerality, geology's never been my strongest suit in wine, but the way I like to think about it is, a couple of things really intermix the soils and create these complex soil types: mountains, rivers, and plates moving around. Because that makes erosion. Of course, there's wind as well. But we're tucked into the mountains here. Going to Alto Adige, of course, we have our German-speaking north in Alto Adige and the Italian-speaking south in Trentino. But I've been a huge fan of the wines coming from Alto Adige for quite some time. Love the Kettmeyer wines. Sparkling wines really do just a stellar job. This area also known for apple orchards, but world-class wine coming from the region. And back to Andrea for more.
So well said, because I think the diversity of soil types in this region is probably a big part of what makes it so distinctive. Christina Sazama, the educator for Santa Margarita, USA, which imports the Kettmeyer wines among many other wonderful ones, just talk about how did this region get such diverse soils? We see all the grape varieties that it's successful with. What's the story? Why is it so diverse?
Yeah, so yes, the Alto Adige and where Kettmeyer is located and where these vineyards are planted, I kind of describe the Alto Adige as an outdoor museum of soil types, right? This is an area of amazing diversity from one vineyard to the next and from one vine to the next. We've got different altitudes, different exposures to the sun and wind. But of course, like you said, we've got a diversity of soil types here. So this area originating from the prehistoric seabeds, there's underground volcanoes here. And of course, the movement of the ancient glaciers. So that's really why there's such a diversity of the soil types here, coming from so many different sources. And that's why, we're making 100% varietal wines, including this Pinot Bianco, but there's still a complexity in the glass. And part of that is, absolutely driven by the diversity of soil types here.
So as I was researching it, you like you said, there's massive glacial deposits, and there are places I think you can stand in the region where you can see a glacier, a mountain, and then you can be standing next to a vineyard that's an ancient seabed, similar to a limestone kind of chalk deposit or close to it. So with this particular wine, the Pinot Bianco, and I wish everybody could do this tasting side by side of this Pinot Bianco with the next wine we're going to taste, the Pinot Grigio from Friuli. It's a really interesting comparison. But talk specifically about the sourcing for this fruit and what the land is like that the grapes are grown on and what kind of conditions they're dealing with.
Sure. So Kettmeyer's Pinot Bianco, the vineyards are planted east, southeast exposures at sort of what would be considered, I guess, a mid elevation in the Alto Adige, this mountainous region. So we're sort of 400 to 600 meters, which I think is about 1,300 feet to maybe almost 2,000 feet in elevation. These vineyards are on very steep hillsides that are west of Lake Caldero, which we just saw in the Geosom tour, around a little place called Castel Vecchio. There are, even because they are on that steep slope, there are different soil types, you know, from sort of the upper reaches of the vineyard areas to the lower reaches of the vineyard area, even in such a small area where we get these grapes.
It's just really interesting to see that. And then
this is kind of the view of where the vines are. This is the view that the vines had. So that's Lake Caldero there, and we're sort of
right.
over, so mid elevation like that. Yep.
Exactly. So, but are you having any, is there any climatic influence from the lake proximity as well? Does that, I know it's considered to be a sunny region, but what does the lake do for the region?
Well, the lake actually doesn't do a whole heck of a lot. It's very shallow. So it's only a few meters deep. It actually freezes over in the wintertime, or can freeze over in the wintertime. So it doesn't have as significant of an influence as other wine regions would have when it comes to a body of water nearby.
So in terms of soils, then, if we look at a little bit about the soil types that you have there, because it looks like you're sourcing from a couple of different sections of vineyard. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah, and so what we're looking at here, this is the upper section. We do have, the one thing to note here is you'll see in all of the vineyard shots that we have, again, a lot of rocks in the vineyard. And like you were speaking about before, rocks don't do a really great job at holding water. So there is an element of hydric stress, sort of, you know, making the vines struggle a little bit. But here we are seeing a little bit more sandy in nature and more of the rounded pebbles. So from the sort of glacier moranic movements around in this area, whereas when we get down to the lower parts of the vineyards where we're sourcing, there's a little bit more clay in the soil down there. Clay will hold water a little bit better than sand. Sand is going to let that through. Clay is going to hold on to it a little bit better. So the clay is going to help with a little bit more ripeness like that. And you'll see here that the stones here are sharper. They're not quite as rounded. And so these are more of, as opposed to the first photo where the pebbles were being sort of rounded out by glacial movements here. This is more tumbling down off the sides of the mountain. So a little bit sharper. But you can see between the sand and the clay, the different ways that it holds water and nutrients that is going to impact sort of the relative ripeness within the vineyard. So again, really translating into complexity in the glass, even though this is a varietally driven wine.
Very, yeah, very layered elements of, for sure, wet rocks. It does smell of mineral. I know that, and everyone has their different definition of that, but for me, it's almost like walking into, you know, one of the nutrition stores and you're kind of smelling all the different like preparations and minerals and vitamin C and rose hips and all that stuff. But it really does give this tension in the palate that really makes it, I think, very, I think really food worthy, because it just keeps making your mouth water and leaves your mouth feeling dry and clean and ready for the next bite or the next sip. Fantastic, beautiful wine, and beautiful expression, I think, of kind of letting the vineyard and the climate do its thing and sort of staying out of the way. Thank you, Christina. Now we move on to Felix Yerman, and we'll be tasting the Pinot Grigio. and a particular soil type for this particular area, very unusual and I think almost unique to this area. Felix, can you tell us a little bit about it?
No, hi guys, here I am. Just I wanted to say a little comment. It's so beautiful to actually see all of these beautiful areas, especially like in around San Francisco. I live there, and so it was really good actually to hear more about them. And it's so great that we can all do this and travel around the world with you guys, even though we are at home. So soil type of Friuli Collio here. So for this Pinot Grigio, as we talked last time, Andrea, we actually sourced it from two little different locations, but here definitely the protagonist is the Ponca. The Ponca is a marlstone and sandstone, basically sedimentary sands compressed over the years, and it comes in layers. On the surface, we have this more friable, used, so to say, earth, of course, worked by the man and worked also by the weather, by the climate. And then as we go deeper down in underneath the vineyards, where really the roots where roots really like suck in all of the nutrients, as we can see here, where actually this is my hand, this is the Ponca. This is like a beautiful picture to show the Ponca, because it really comes in layers. I told you, we have this harder layer, compressed layer, and then we also have this softer layer. And the roots really go really deep down here, 3-4 meters into the ground. And there is very little irrigation. Only some of the vineyards are irrigated in the Collio, in the hillside. And the strength about the Ponca, of course, is that it really traps the nutrients or the water, so to say, over the drought periods in the summer in this softer layer. So this is something very special. Marlstone and sandstone compressed sands over the years, really, really special. And the minerality, comes out really beautiful. I think a beautiful moment to experience also, the smell and the taste of the earth itself is when we make the new vineyards. Because as all of the winemakers here will actually be able to tell you, is that when you make the vineyard itself, that's when the fragrances and aromas of the vineyards, of the location, of the area itself really come out. And it's a beautiful moment. It's important to be there. And I think some of these essences are found also in the wines as well. So this is, so to say, the Ponca side. And then we also have the Isonzo side. Andrea, I don't know if you want me to talk a little bit about that too, because
Please,
it really gives the complexity to this wine. So Ponca, hillside, Collio, right on the border between Slovenia. Then we have these alluvial deposits, which other producers also mentioned here today. Here, these are alluvial deposits from the river Isonzo. This is actually exactly down there where you were pointing the arrow, Andrea. That's exactly the river valley, so to say. And there we have these alluvial deposits, which bring more freshness to the wines itself. The soil type are both alkaline in a sense here. As you remember, you were asking me last time, Andrea. So with a little bit of a different degree in pH, but they're both alkaline. So that's a quality, and it's beautiful because Pinot Grigio, I think when you bring together vineyards both from the river valley, Friuli, and the Collio side, the hillside Collio vineyards, we are able to bring this Pinot Grigio that is unlike anybody else, because we have the freshness from the river valley, but then we have the structure, the body, and more salinity, so to say, from the Ponca. So if we have to say, maybe Ponca brings more salinity, so to say, and the river valley terrain, the alluvial deposits bring more minerals or more freshness in that sense. So that's the Pinot Grigio.
And as we look at the vineyard image, or the one that we were looking at, where where you've got the hillside and the close-up section, you had, it looks like some sort of planting, or at least grass allowed, or some sort of grass allowed between the rows on the hillside. And I was just curious about that because on the one hand, they say that cover crop competes for water, but on the other hand, they say that plantings between the rows help to keep the soil from eroding. And that was a big thing that Phil talked about in the very first wine. What's the strategy there on the hillsides? Are you just letting the crop grow, or are you planting something?
So on the hillside, because before the, so to say, the world has become trend, so the wine has become a trend back before also the wars that the region has seen. The hillside vineyards actually, or the hillside was dedicated for orchard, so fruits, cherries, apples, all sorts of different kind of fruits that grow really well. And to say that Yerman, my grandfather, have always been very keen to, keep a biodiverse ecosystem. A lot of our vineyards as well are surrounded by forest, by wood. And within the vineyard itself, we have actually a lot orchards in a sense. You probably see in that picture at the bottom. Whereas when we think exactly in the layer, so in the vineyards, in the road itself, we normally have one row that is worked, so aerated with the tractor, and one row that is grass and that lives. For Yerman, sustainability is very important, but we really do keep our vineyards like gardens. They are so looked after, super clean, super curated. So we do allow biodiversity to happen in the vineyards, but it is very controlled. This is, so to say, the Yerman style, which then is also found in the wines to be, very much perfectly an example of the terroir itself and the grape variety.
Yeah, beautiful honey clover, very pretty expression in the nose, and then still that beautiful tension on the palate. All of the wines that we've tasted today, I think there's some common themes that I want to draw there, because you talked about biodiversity. I don't think there's anybody who didn't talk about maintaining, habitat and the natural plant ecosystem of the area being a very important part of it. You see that very prominently with the various images that we've shown. And I think it's also that the water stress that's allowing the vines to have to work on fruit, because let's remember that they're adapted. All creatures are adapted to survive and for the species to survive, and that means reproduction, and that means that you ripen your fruit and you ripen your seeds, so that that plant can be fruitful and expand its life going into the future. So when we talk about a terroir and its expression of place in the wine, I think all those things come out to be really important, and they give us very, very detailed, it might be subtle, but detailed expression in the wine. And that's why it's interesting for us, because if it hits you over the head with, just being something big as opposed to layered and filigreed, it doesn't take as much intellectually from us. And we all came to wine because it demanded our attention, not just it, gave us a buzz. So all of these have been really, really fun ways of exploring that. And I think they're all beautiful expressions. I want to thank everybody. And I know that I forgot to ask Greg to fly us over to Friuli from Alto Adige. I'm sorry about that. I have run over a little bit on the time on this, and I'm conscious of everybody's time. We do have a couple of questions in the Q&A. So if anybody has to sign off, totally understand, but I don't want to not speak to them. And I'll just ask Phil if you or your team can answer in the chat. Domingo Ruiz is asking, was any Semillon brought, or you might be able to answer this straight up on camera, from along with the Sauvignon Blanc from Echem? And if yes, does Myriad as well produce any monovarietal wines or blends from it? Do you have is that a quick one, or should we have you type it?
The answer is yes. That we have grown Semillon for a long time and still do. There is a little bit of Semillon in the Sauvignon Blanc, and we occasionally make a single varietal or a solo varietal Semillon that is for sale at the tasting room only.
Fantastic. Zachary in the chat is asking if the discussions are able to be viewed again, and if so, where can I do so? Lars, I know you can tell us about that, right?
I'm not sure about that. I know that we do have the recordings. I'm not sure if the chats are live, but we will try to make that happen. Let me put it that way.
Yeah, and I think he may mean that to be able to watch the recording. If it's just to be able to rewatch it, yeah, on the Somm Journal website.
Somm Journal website, Facebook Live, and also through sommfoundation.com.
There you go. So all of those are available. And for both the Napa presenters, do you find any link between climate change and wine mineral expression in Napa, possibly related to changes in chemical composition of rain that may translate to soil composition? I'll throw one quick thing in there, and I would say with drier conditions, we're getting more acid soils, and that does change the way the vine can uptake minerals, but then it also dictates some things that might be done in the vineyard relating to soil amendments. I don't think either of these wineries are having to do a lot of that. If Jillian, I know Russ is not, he had to jump for something, but Jillian, if you have anything else to say on that, I think mostly what we're talking about there is keeping soil health alive. And that's happening through these cover crops that fix nitrogen, careful management of irrigation where it's needed, but not to excess. And sometimes soil amendment to put back, as I think Phil, it was either Phil or Steve said, we got to put back what we take away. And that's for sure true. And then we have a final question, and it's a long one. So it basically, though, it says, how do you feel or respond to comments that minerality, for example, rocky minerality, isn't tasteable? And that goes back to the core of the question. We don't have the tools and technology yet to measure exactly what we're tasting in the wine and what particular element that was picked up in the vine through its water uptake where the minerals were dissolved, because that's part of the question, and what that does to flavors and flavor precursors in the wine that ultimately end up there. We also don't know what individual mouth pH does to individual people's ability to taste particular things. But what we do know is that the vine does take up minerals from the soil, and it uses them. It has to have certain of them to go anywhere in its life. And the way it does it is very particular to the spot. And the way we taste them is very particular to the taster. Does anybody have anything else that they feel like we should add to that answer? All right. So
I would just chime in real quick. The texture has so
Please.
much to do with it, but so much of the wine in your mouth is volatile aromatics anyway.
Yes.
So when you think about taste, you really think you're tasting the aromatics.
Indeed. I think you're exactly right. And that's, yeah, I always say tasting is 90% smell. I think that's probably right. So, or close. But anyway, fantastic, everyone. Thank you so much, Lars and Greg. I'm sorry about screwing up that last little bit there.
Not at all. Andrea, once again, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, I was going to hand it back to you.
No, thank you. I was just going to say, once again, you've proven exactly why you have a reputation as one of the nation's top wine educators. So great job today. Thank you. Thank this tremendous panel. It was a wonderful educational experience, you know, and I've just got to chime in. I'm sitting here, it's sunset in Tuscany, and I've been fortunate enough to be tooling around the vineyards this past week. And it's definitely a recurring theme of everything I heard today. And I think the conclusion that I draw is that what we perceive as minerality, what we call minerality, whether it's truly mineral based or not, has a lot to do with wines that do not, and Andrea, you touched on this, it's wines that do not thrive in fertile soils, but it's wines that survive through difficult situations. And I think all of our panelists touched on that in one way or another. And that's where we get minerality. It's whatever you want to define it as, it's definitely character. because the wines
Well,
have,
just like with people, Lars, they say resiliency builds character, and trial to test your resiliency builds character. I think we can all speak to that. And I think that's a very apt analogy. So I love it.
cool. And speaking of trials to test yourselves, Lynn, you want to give us a quick reminder on the parameters for our little contest here for some real nice rewards?
Sure, Lars, thank you. So once again, we'll be sending out the email prompt by Monday afternoon. So just make sure to check your spam filter if you don't receive that email. You'll have until April 4th to submit your essays, and we will have chosen a final winner by April 11th is our goal. So, and you can always shoot me any questions that you have at lynn.fletcher@somfoundation.com. So good luck to all of you.
Awesome. And quick reminder, the recording of this will be on the Somm Journal platform for Facebook Live, as well as sommjournal.com and sommfoundation.com. And the recap will be in the June-July issue of the Somm Journal. So please make sure you're subscribed to that. If you haven't already, send me a note if you're not, at lars@sommjournal.com, and join us again on April 21st when we talk about sustainability in our next webinar. Check it out at sommjournal.com. Thank you all. Thank you for your time. Thank you, the panelists, for your contributions and great insight. And thank you to our whole audience for tuning in and your attention today. So thank you all. Good evening, good day, and good
everyone.
minerality.
Thank
everybody.
you. Bye.